It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a big hodgepodge episode. We're going to talk Conor McGregor. We're going to give you an antitrust case update. We're going to talk some UFC stuff, some PFL stuff. We've got Matchroom finances. There's a whole bunch of stuff we've got for you. But first, I would ask that you subscribe so that you have access to our bonus content. Now, if you hear little clinking and clanking around my mouth, my teeth, it's because I have a cough drop in. I still have a little bit of a nagging cough hanging on from the flu, and I want to try and get through this episode without having an outburst of coughing, so bear with me. Now, John, how have you been over the past several days?
Good. Right now I'm taking bets on can you get to the show without a coughing fit, so I'm laying odds at 3-1 right now. Any takers?
You know what? We'll have to see which one of us lasts longest.
Oh, well, the good news, I just hit mute all the time. I die over here off mic.
Well, hopefully we both get through this. So, first things first, you have an antitrust update for us on the UFC antitrust case. What is that?
Well, there was a new filing. It's been a while. This is not the first antitrust case, Lee versus Zuffa, which is the one that the fighters are now should be getting their forms to fill out and send in. That should be going out right now. This is for the Johnson v. Zuffa case. So in that case, the plaintiffs, they filed a motion to compel the defendant, in this case, the defendant Endeavor, who's also listed as a defender in the case, to produce documents. They claim that Endeavor has not engaged in discovery in good faith, that despite the court's warning that Endeavor has openly defied the court's directive, that TKO, the parent company for Zuffa as well, has issued sweeping objections to the plaintiff's document request, and that's on top of all that. And that they are asking that the court issue some punishment to Endeavor because of right now, Endeavor is, I guess, handed over only 8 documents in discovery so far. And Zuffa himself has handed over approximately 3,600. So that is, which is not actually a lot compared to the million plus that was done on the previous case. And TKO, the parent company of Zuffa, has produced no documents yet so far.
Were they compelled as well, or is it just Endeavor?
Because TKO is the parent company of Zuffa, they're compelled. They're part of the defense. They're now a defendant. In fact, Endeavor wanted TKO to take over as the defendant to replace them. So TKO's basic position is, we are not involved in this case. We don't want nothing to do with it, and we're not going to do anything. And so what they're asking for the plaintiffs is, they're saying the court already ordered you to do this. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. We want the court to issue what they said they might do the court's one possible thing is the court issued a mandatory presumption, or they want the court to possibly, this is the least they want them to do, is give adverse inference instructions to the jury in the future, of which would include a mandatory presumption. What that means is, if it goes to jury, is that the jury is supposed to assume that the worst case scenario for the plaintiffs, right? Because they're basically, it's like, hey, they are obviously hiding something because they are not following through. What that could also be, according to, is that Endeavor could be subject to sanctions. And sanctions could include something like the court issuing a ruling now in favor of the plaintiffs. That's how extreme it could be. But I find it unlikely they'll do that. The court will probably issue another warning. But that's what the court previously warned Endeavor that could happen, and that's what the plaintiffs are asking them to do.
All right. So we will keep you guys up to date when more information from this case becomes available. So moving on. Former UFC heavyweight competitor Alexei Oleinik talked about needing to fight in bare knuckle FC because he couldn't make ends meet anymore after his divorce. He said his wife took basically everything he had. So he goes and he has this bare knuckle fight and he gets brutally knocked out. What's your biggest takeaway from this very sad story?
Oh, this is a very sad story. This is like a Robert E. Howard boxing story. If anybody read his old stuff, this is just a bleak story of the fight business. I guess my primary takeaway is, at a personal level, is just it's something you see a lot actually in all combat sports, is guys hanging around because the money's in the sport. They have no other skills, no savings. This is the reason they keep saying we need pensions in combat sports, because otherwise the athletes end up hanging around too long. So that'd be my primary thing, is it does kind of explain why you want pensions, which we have nothing like that. Even the California pension doesn't really do enough to prevent something like this. The other thing is it just kind of shows the nature, the structure of the sport, how kind of messed up it is, because specifically MMA is because MMA, I guess compared to boxing, again, we always compare to boxing, but boxing, generally you rise to the top and your purses, MMA similar, but a little different. We'll get into it. Your purses get astronomically bigger, right? Just the massive purses. So you go from making nothing to becoming a challenger in the top 10. Your purses rise to amount where you're like, okay, that's an acceptable amount. And then you get into title contention and you're making millions, and then you're champion and it can inflate even more. And so when you fall out of that, your purses basically drop completely. There's nothing like in MMA where there's the Andre Arlovsky situation where he's getting large purses, more than he got in most of his career, just because he's a veteran with a name. There's not that idea of this person hanging around making more than they did previously, earlier in their career, just because they've been around so long. And that's the part of MMA I do not like, because we are incentivizing people to continue in the sport as long as possible, to make as much as possible, when the incentive should be get to be as good as you can, as high as you can, make as much of money, and then incentivize them to get the hell out. Now, his situation is a little different because he's going through a divorce. And, we're only getting the information from the interview from his side, so I don't know how accurate it is. But it did sound like when you do a conversion from rubles to dollars, that's it. I mean, according to him, he had like $1.5 million he gave to his wife. That should have been enough for him to exit the business.
Switching gears here to a very, very epic fall from grace. Now, I know last week you said, I hate talking about Conor McGregor, but we kind of gotta, because he launched a meme coin this week. It's called the Real Coin. And that thing turned out to be a dud, a disaster. Do you think his timing was off with all of the volatility of the stock market? Or do you think people are just done with him?
I mean, part of it, I think it might have been the stock market might have been part of it, because no one was paying attention. But the other thing, I didn't hear much about it. There didn't see, the promotion for it did not seem that great. But of course, I could have been distracted by this thing called our burning stock market that's falling apart like a Zeppelin right in front of us. But so it's hard for me to say which it is, because I personally don't pay attention to one, Conor McGregor, and two, meme coins. So, I'm not the target audience for this, but I'm going to guess that the story that with the market overtook this, because also all these people that might possibly be interested in meme coins, they probably were paying attention to what's going on to Bitcoin and other crypto at the same time.
Well, let me ask you this. He had to return money to his investors. But Haley Welch, the Hawk Tua girl, for those of you that don't know her name, she did not. Why did she not have to return her money to the investors, but he did?
Well, it's my understanding from briefly perusing the story is that he failed to meet the minimum requirement for the launch, that it had to sell over $1 million and only sold like 30 to 40% as much. So they had to return the money because they didn't meet the bare minimum of sales necessary for it to go through. For Hawk Tua, she conducted a rug pull. I mean, honestly, there's very likely Conor McGregor's got him and his guys were planning a rug pull as well. It seems to be everybody does that now. But she did a rug pull where there's wallets, digital wallets that were connected to her and the people that were doing it. And so when it reached the level of the sales, they were able to dump their coins instead of letting the general public dump their coins. And that's how then the price collapsed. And everybody else was holding the bag while they sold all their shares and walked away with millions, or how much ever money they had.
She made $26 million.
Oh God!
Now Conor McGregor, he didn't even make the 30% mark. His came in at 280,000.
That's just Conor. That's how bad Conor's gotten. He can't even compete with the Hawk Tuah girl.
John, let's talk about Conor's wealth, because last year we discussed him and we discussed how he's basically made himself generational wealth. My question to you is, do you think it's possible that he's burned through it?
I mean, it seems inconceivable that he would. I mean, we look at the amount of money he's made that we know. In the UFC, he made $27 million from the UFC. So that's not Floyd Mayweather. That's not Canelo. That's generational wealth for most people. But when people talk about generational wealth for ultra wealthy people, that doesn't get you in that will not get you in the ultra wealthy category. But he made $27 million in his first 9 fights. Since then, in his remaining other UFC fights, UFC estimates I have that he probably made almost 80 million or so in that ballpark. So over 100 million total in his UFC career. Now, that should be enough after taxes, after training, after managers. That's enough to get you in the alternate high worth and generational wealth. But again, people are probably thinking hundreds of millions to be, one of these people that can, fly private jets and never have to worry about money. And that's not that situation, because you can do bad investments, your house, you can have problems with your real estate, whatever. But it's still, that's a ton of money. And then you throw on top of that his Floyd Mayweather purse, which was, the amount that the cut that the UFC got, Zuffa got for it was over 100 million. My understanding, he got about 50% of that. So again, he got another, let's say 50 to 60, 70 million before taxes, before all of his expenses. That's gross, not net for him. But again, that adds to his pile. And then, of course, there's the, his sponsorship deals, which he gets some money from. I don't think he gets anything really anymore. I don't think there's no interest in him being a sponsor because of his actions. But then the big one is the Proper 12 whiskey, which he ended up selling, and people inflated the amount, but he still made, well over 100 million on that. So you add that up, and he should have ultra net high worth, well over 100 million in net worth available to him and be set for life. But you look at the way he behaves, you look at how it does not look like he has massive amounts of income coming in anymore, that he may be spending a lot of money on potentially not legal substances. He hangs around people that have dubious reputations. Namely the Kinahan family, crime organization in Ireland. Who knows what? Are they hanging around with him just because they like him, or
his sister dates him?
Yes. But if we look at how they money laundered with prize fighters, and they'd use that. So is there any of his money being used up by those guys? Has he made bad investments? All these things say, he should still have money. I would be shocked if he's broke. The problem is he's a guy that seems like he's intent on living a certain lifestyle and being in a certain wealth. And if you're burning through it, it's like, it's one thing to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars and you can basically throw money around. But eventually that hundreds of millions of dollars could be dwindled to an amount that you're still very wealthy compared to most people. But now you're suddenly worried, where's the money going to come from? Because I'm burning through it. I mean, Scottie Pippen is a famous case of someone, not quite that level, but he burned through his money. So it's, I think that is a possibility, just the way he behaves. You look at the amount of money he spends on stuff, it seems like, and his actions. So it seems like he does have a high burn rate through his money, even when he's ultra wealthy. And I don't know where the money's coming in anymore. So, I would be a little concerned about that. I guess the big question is, will he be in the next Roadhouse movie? Because that will tell you how far he's fallen if they do not want to bring him back.
I hear there's interest, but who knows? When I say his sister's dating him, what I mean is not Daniel Kinahan, but his right-hand man, his number one capo. That's who his sister's been dating for the last 3 years. My other question to you is, a lot is made of the fact that in 2019, he topped the Forbes list for athletes. Remind everybody what the catch is on the Forbes list.
Well, the catch is that the Forbes list, it's the reporting is dependent a lot on the athletes themselves or their management sharing the information. And so there's a lot of evidence that some athletes do not inflate the amount they make. Some athletes actually hide some of the income they have. They don't want people to know about it. Some athletes are very free with what they made. My understanding is, talking to people, that the Ngannou people, after his, last year, or I guess the previous, because it's at the time for Forbes, it was in spring. They did it for the previous 12 months. So it was his 2 boxing matches. They were close enough. He was close enough to possibly getting on the list that they were very open with sharing their information to Forbes. But for Conor McGregor, we've seen before consistently when he reports, he inflates, the purses are inflated. They're getting that information from him and his team. And often his other numbers reported by his team, because part of his image is being this Mayweather guy for MMA. It's obvious that his information has been inflated. In fact, I've talked to people that do these kind of those sites that do these athlete pay, and they pretty much readily admit now that a lot of their information was inflated in the past from his side.
I mean, we could look just a couple of months ago at when the settlement happened, and he tweeted out, "Cool, another 20 million for me." No, sir, you're not even getting 10 million.
Well, he might get 10 million depending on how many people.
True,
file.
but I mean, the rough estimate was, I believe you said it was like 9.6, and that Anderson Silva was actually the one that would be getting the most.
That is correct. Our estimate, based on how the money was split by what athletes made during that period, he would be getting somewhere over 9 million. Under 10 million, over 9. I can't remember the exact amount. That's for Conor McGregor. Anderson Silva is over 10 million.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to swap gears here, and we are going to talk about a brand new UFC signing, Aaron Pico. That's someone we have talked about that would have good value to the UFC. So he finally got his release from PFL, and I don't know what in the heck Movsar Evloev has done to the UFC, but they booked Aaron Pico against him, a super tough wrestler. But to add insult to injury on Aaron's side, this thing is happening in the apex. Why do you think that UFC went this direction after expressing such an interest in him a few months ago?
I think they did have an interest in him. I think they do. I'm kind of somewhat shocked by the PFL. Not shocked, but PFL was kind of holding their ground about their contractual rights, and then obviously I think the bad press led them to that they've consistently got led them to let him go. But I can only guess what the matchmakers are doing, and based on what we know how the UFC operates, and based on what we knew from like the Discovery and the disclosed material, my guess is they see Pico as an extremely talented guy. They want to test how good he is, but they also wouldn't mind him losing to set the message that new fighters coming in that are highly touted from Bellator, PFL. The UFC is the true major league. So it's kind of a win-win. Aaron Pico comes in, he gets beat. They can point out and say, oh, look, the PFL fighters, the Bellator fighters, Pico had never fought for, did he ever fight for PFL? I don't believe he did he? It fell through every fight.
I think it fell through, but
Yeah, maybe I fought one fight, but Bellator fighters, they're not up to this level. So it reinforces that. But if he wins, it's like, we have an exciting new guy in the UFC. He's got the rub off Movsar. We can move him up quickly up to the top of cards. So I think that's their other their other thinking. Now, as for the Apex, yeah, that's bad because you'd like, preferably you'd like to get them in front of an audience. It's more interesting. But again, the UFC has to keep the machine going. And sometimes I wonder if well, he's here, he wants to fight. We have a slot on the Apex. We can get our ESPN money by putting a main event there. Let's just do that and get it over with.
The only fight he ever had that even had PFL in the name was when PFL versed Bellator in February of 2024.
I watched that and I forgot about that fight. So okay. That could, I guess he's a PFL Bellator fighter. I would, he's still Bellator.
I think he was Bellator when that fight happened though, right? Or was,
he was, that was his first, he was representing Bellator, I believe, for that one. So
in any event, I was just shocked to see that they were putting it in the Apex, when he's a pretty big signing, I feel. So
yeah, well, it sucks for me because Apex, as you know, is my general rule.
I know that's your kryptonite, man. You will not.
Well, it lets me. I love it because it's a signal. I don't have to watch the card, and I'm like, what are you doing putting on fights that I want to watch at the Apex? It kind of ruins the purpose of the Apex because the Apex is there to let me know I can skip the card.
Yeah. Well, maybe not that one. All right. So let's talk about Norma Dumont, because I read an article about her that says that she's having trouble finding opponents that will get her a path to the title. And she is riding a 5-fight win streak, and she's got good wins too. So the women's bantamweight division has been a little bit stagnant. What problems do you think the women's divisions have right now? And what would be a fix for that?
Well, the fix is always new talent. It's unfortunate there's not another promotion loaded with women bantamweight talent at that level that you could bring in and have interesting matchups with people that are ranked comparably to the UFC, kind of like a Strikeforce situation or a Pride. That'd be the number one. But I think their big problem too is it's just the way the UFC operates, the way fighters think the UFC works. This shouldn't be a problem for it. I read the article too, and she said one thing, she doesn't want to fight someone lower because it won't help her get to the title. And right now it's like, well, no one's available above you, and you're ranked in the UFC like fourth. You're the fourth contender. And so if you're going to fight anybody, you have to fight someone lower than you, right? You can't say I'm going to fight no one lower. This is where I'd like to see the UFC, which they won't do because they are, as they say in their contracts, we are not a sanctioning organization. But with sanctioning organizations, which are terrible, we always admit, but the one thing they do have is they have guidelines. They have rules you kind of have to follow. And they talk about their rankings. And one thing, you have to fight within a certain amount of time to retain your rankings, and you have to fight someone within a certain amount of rankings. An old ranking, one they used to suggest all the time was in the congressional records, if you're going to stay in the top 15 or whatever, you should have to fight someone in the top 15 within an 18-month period or one year. Well, if she's going to be sitting around and everybody else has fights, the requirement for the UFC should be like, if you want to stay in that number 4 spot, you got to fight someone in the top 15. It doesn't matter who, just someone to retain your position. Otherwise, the rules of the rankings are you are not active against top competition enough, and you will go down. That would incentivize her to fight at least someone instead of sitting around. Yeah,
for sure. But the way she talks, it seems like there's not being any offers made to her at all.
Well, I think there's been no offers of the people she wants to fight. Okay. It did sound like there was, because she did say, I just don't want to fight someone lower in the rankings. I'm like, that's everybody. You are at the very top of the rankings. That's the one problem is the UFC fighters have got in their head, and that's partly the way the UFC works, is that because it's a ladder, no one wants to fight anybody behind them. And there's no incentive, there's no rules, there's no structure that says you have to stay busy enough to hold your place. And that would incentivize people to like, well, I got to fight someone. I will take a risk against someone lower in the rankings.
All right. Now, Endeavor, they came close to purchasing Formula One a few years back, but Liberty Media swooped in and scooped it up instead. But the rumors are flying that next year, Liberty may be looking to sell because I think the contract is up or something along those lines. I don't know what it is, but Liberty might be looking to sell next year. Do you think that Endeavor, TKO might be looking at them again?
I think they'd be interested. It kind of fits their model. Matters what the asking price is, and if can they, my understanding is there is some crossover with the negotiating sponsors, the fan base and stuff, more than you would think.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that because I remember Francis Ngannou's team at the CAA did a presentation. They showed they tracked some. There's supposedly, according to them, there was some crossover between F1 and UFC fans, and I think you're a prime example of that.
Yep.
So maybe there's some truth there. So I think they could be interested at the price would have to be the question. I think it'd be TKO. The one thing about TKO is they do have several $1 billion in debt, but they have massive amount of profits. They're going to have even more profits going forward after the UFC's next deal, barring disaster. Who knows what's going to happen with the market? We might all be, cooking with fire in a couple months. But barring some, asteroid hitting disaster, they're going to be making more profits. And with that, they don't need Endeavor as much. TKO could probably get a loan if the interest rates don't skyrocket to prevent the oncoming inflation we're going to get from all the tariffs. But they can get a loan. They could probably afford it themselves, finance it themselves. So I do think it's possible. I mean, do I know for sure? No, but I think it's a possibility because I think that's the type of company that fits their model. It's not a combat sport, but neither is bull riding, but it is a sport where they are the governing body, they are the league, they're the ownership, they're, for the entire thing, it's single entity. All those put together, it matches their other properties where basically you have a monopoly in many ways, and F1 is close to monopoly as well over a sports structure, and that they love that stuff.
Yeah, I think Netflix is the reason why there's so many crossover fans now, because we have a lot of crossover UFC fans that are just getting into Formula One. And it's been over the last 5 years that Drive to Survive has been airing on Netflix. And that made Formula One accessible and very dramatic and spicy because of the way Netflix films that show and the way that they present it. Like, they are classic, just like the Ultimate Fighter would, show you cherry-picked scenes, you know what I mean? But you didn't get to see the whole thing. That's kind of the way Drive to Survive is, and I think that's why we're seeing so many crossover fans. But I will die. I will literally curl up and die if TKO manages to get their hands on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing with TKO, then they would have more leverage. Not that, I mean, Netflix has monstrous leverage because it does revenue, but TKO would have it would give them access to all the properties apparently Netflix wants to start airing as their sports properties.
Ugh.
They'd have F1, and then they'd have UFC, which they're hoping to sign in Netflix, and of course WWE right now. So that would be that'd be a hell of a roster.
Shit. Now, you sort of alluded to it a little bit, following up from our last show where we talked about if the UFC would be harmed, injured in any way due to the volatile market. But now, when we talked, the market wasn't looking quite like this. We'd only had one day. But now we're in market free fall. I mean, they called the NASDAQ a full-on bear market today. So, how do you think that the UFC does now with this whole situation? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!